this is being recorded, so if you don't want your face, change your output there. On the other hand, is COVID-19 and You. I am your host, Tom Macheski. I am a registered nurse, which I suspect is why Deb put me on this panel. No, not, yeah, I see you there. Anyway, welcome everybody. My assistant panelists are and Kendall and Ruby Shea, I believe, who's going under a pseudonym in my window here. So the purpose of this is going to be to discuss some things probably that we have been doing individually. And mine with this as a professional that's dealing with it. And anybody that will, I'm going to keep an eye on the clock, and at this point, I'd like to start tossing my fellow panelists, and I'm going to call you Alan because when I got into the session today.
Did you just call me? You're kind of broken up with the voice. I couldn't tell.
That's my, I got a little window keeps showing up saying my internet connection is unstable, but I'm going to hang in here as long as I can. Yes, I did.
Okay. So I think you just asked me to introduce myself. My connection with this is twofold. So I'm a PhD biochemist. I did a little work with viruses back in my science days. I did some teaching in virology classes at some point, but this point in time and this phase of my life, much later, I'm actually a teacher in Title I high schools in Florida. So can certainly speak to what's going on in at least one district. I know Monique and I, who's also a panelist, have been going back and forth throughout the whole time. And I think it'll probably be an interesting contrast because our districts are being managed very, very differently.
All right. You're next, Ruby.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Ruby Shea, and as far as my everyday role, I actually do emergency management for the Department of Health and the State as well. I am the coordinator for the Strategic National Stockpile and Pandemics. So welcome to the world. And also some additional coordinator roles that I do. I kind of wear like about 5, 6 coordinator hats. So this is right up my alley. I cope with this every day across the county and across the state. And as a technical consultant for the federal government as well. So we're kind of in a very interesting time. For my teachers, I'll give a shout out to my teachers because I was a master trainer teacher for, practically almost 20 plus years. So yeah, I'm kind of on all sides of this coin, in addition to doing consulting as well. I consult agencies and stuff like that. So I've been working with other groups and other creative groups, like I presented on COVID-19 stuff on HauntCon for the creatives. And, how are you coping with this and still managing your business and pivoting and stuff like that? That's me.
Thank you, Ruby. Kendall, you're up next.
Actually, Tom, I'm not. I'm the wrong Kendall. There's another Kendall coming on. He's out of my field, but I just spoke to him. He's on his. He's had to work today, but he'll be here in a minute or two.
Okay, I do understand that.
Yeah,
right, well,
you work at a hospital, you work when they tell you.
That's it exactly. And that's been where I've had probably the majority of my dealings. Although, yeah, like I said, all of us are out and about. We're here in this meeting, so I don't see anybody wearing a face mask. And guess what? Yeah, I've still got mine here. Part of the reason I brought mine is one of the early things that I started getting addressed with through a couple of writers groups I'm in on the Discord was how to wear a mask, and people were complaining that it was fogging up glasses. So I don't know how well you can see this one. You can see it's got a shape across the top of it. All of the masks that we use that the hospitals provide us have got a small wire bar across the top of them. You mold that across your nose when you put it on. And that goes a long ways toward preventing any of your exhaled air blowing up and over your glasses and fogging up your glasses. You can make your own masks, you can buy them. Whichever way, yeah, the data is getting pretty strong showing that wearing a mask is going to cut down on the transmission. As a registered nurse in the hospital, a couple of other people told me, how long? And I said, no, it isn't a question of how long. It's not even a question of if. So far, I have got 2 documented positive exposures. And so far, I have tested negative after both of them because I'm wearing my personal protective equipment. So it's
Tom, there's one more person you didn't get a chance to introduce themselves. Monique hasn't introduced herself yet.
I'm sorry, Monique. I think I'm going off of the list that I've got. And I did see you on Deb's email to me. So kick yourself in, unmute yourself, and let us know you're here.
It's okay. I was last minute. Sorry. Thank you so much, Anne. And everybody. Like Alan said, I'm a school teacher also. And it's been really something else, for lack of a better word. I also like to read a lot of geeky stuff about viruses and such. And so this topic is very, you know, relevant to me. That's all I have to say.
That's a good introduction, though. And I am looking forward a lot to what both you and Alan are going to have to say about this in terms of teaching, because a lot of the questions that I got that I was talking to you about from the different groups on the Discord are from people who are teachers. And yeah, they've had some real interesting stories to tell about this. Why don't you take off on some of that then? Either one of you, either Alan or Monique, and start giving us some of that.
You want to go first, or should I, Monique?
You can go.
Okay. Well, when we're talking about COVID-19 and dealing with the school district, we're both in Florida, so we're dealing with the parameters that Trump set, and we're dealing with the parameters that Ron DeSantis set. And earlier this morning, I was talking to Ann Morris in the con suite, and one of the things that she said unprompted was, well, you know, I guess this panel is not going to be able to avoid politics. You guys are going to have to be getting political when you talk about that stuff. And so I guess I can put on my political mask right here. One of the, as Tom was saying, you can get it from various places. This one has a message. But since I'm sitting in my office at home, I could just talk without one. The issue that our district has been, given the parameters, given that schools must open face-to-face 5 days, what do you do? And Monique is a very different contrasting story, but I think that our district down in Lee County, which is the Fort Myers, Cape Coral, and Lehigh Acres area, has probably done as good a job as possible. Part of it is because they've got a lot of us whispering ear of either the superintendent or board members, whoever we knew better. So giving them information. I mean, I've seen cases where things that I and other people said have later come out of the mouths of board members. And so they've gotten the right advice there. I watched the board meeting in the summer where they were voting on what to do, and when they voted to require masks, and there were a lot of 20-2 votes, with the 2 votes being the parents who were anti-maskers who muscled themselves onto the committee. Everybody else, all of their stakeholders, were completely ignoring them, to the point where one of the anti-maskers threw a hissy fit and just left the Zoom meeting and said nasty things to everyone. In my book, this is good. They're basically going with the science. Now, what that has meant on a day-to-day basis in the high school where I teach is the entire auditorium has been taken over as the COVID staging area. The kids are not even allowed in the building without the health checks. So there is they have commandeered buses just to take kids home because they look sick. So if they look sick, they're not getting in the door. And they put them on a bus, send them home. Now, granted, I'm dealing with high school kids. I don't think you could do this with 8 to 10-year-olds. So it's not the right solution for elementary school. But if you've got a 16-year-old and they came to school sick, and the worst thing that happens is they have to let themselves into their house, that is probably not the end of the world. And what they're doing is they are doing their own contact tracing. We have to submit our seating charts and keep updating them. In fact, I got an email saying that I got to update mine pretty much in the middle of the panel. I got that email, so I'll do that after the conference is over. The way they use the seating charts for is to see who is within 6 feet, because that's the basis that they're using. 6 feet for 15 minutes, which means if they're on the seating chart within 6 feet in a class, those are the people who have to quarantine. So every single person, just about, I think it's like almost all the high schools in the district and a lot of the other schools have had COVID cases. But according to the health department, there has not been a single trace of community transmission in our school district. And our school district is not small. I think it's like the 4th or 5th biggest in the state. What that means is these kids have caught it from elsewhere, but it stopped right there. And I think, yes, it would make a lot more sense if we had a governor who would have just shut down the entire state for 3 weeks and done it tightly and enforced it. And that would have knocked the cases down before you tried to set up and start with face-to-face teaching. But we're kind of doing the best I can in this district. The other issue is you have face-to-face, you have what's called home connect, where you are in your classroom, you're teaching, but the kids are all on Zoom, and then you have a hybrid model. I teach, since I had asked for home connect, but the other 2 people who could teach what I teach, one of them is 75 years old, and the other one is 64 with serious health issues. So as a 54-year-old, I was the young spring chicken that basically they thought could be fine with all of this. So I've got one hybrid class and all the rest face-to-face. And because of kids shifting in, shifting out, because every time parents change their mind, they have new floods of people coming in. So I have classes that are changing their enrollment every single day. I've got so many desks in the room for one of the classes that the state health inspectors threw a hissy fit just because it was a fire safety hazard. But I only have the one hybrid class. So that's a matter of dealing with the communications technology of going back and forth, despite, since I work in a high poverty area, about 3/4 of the kids having inadequate bandwidth. So what was happening over there with Tom, imagine worse with 3/4 of the kids you're trying to teach, while I still have kids that are face-to-face. And yeah, there were a few kids I have to keep saying, put your mask back on your nose or stuff like that. But for the most part, the kids are not resisting it. I think one of the issues might be the type of kids I'm teaching, because I live on my bike ride that I took during the summer with very close to my house, that was the Costco where they had that guy go nuts and it made national news, them throwing him out of Costco. That's the type of people that are around where I live. But that's basically the white people. And I'm teaching in a school that's majority Hispanic and a lot of the rest is Black. And I'm not seeing much of that in an organized sense. I'm not seeing the anti-masker protests. That is definitely generally a right-wing white person type of thing to be doing. And I won't say I don't have a few kids who don't get it and will argue with me, but for the most part, the overwhelming majority of the kids realize that they don't want to get sick. They think what's going on is reasonable and they are complying with it. And now for a totally different story, we'll go to Monique over here.
I live in Pinellas County, and our district is the 8th largest in Florida. So it's kind of similar to Alan's in the sense that I have one hybrid model that I do, and we do have a lot of people that are anti-maskers, but the principal at my school, she's been doing a really good job of reminding kids to use their sanitizing stations. They're just like, little places where you get hand sanitizer out in the hallways. Students that are not wearing their mask, they get warnings, and she's been really good at sending them home to do the virtual learning. I don't know how many warnings they've had, but I know it's happening. And then because of my own personal thing going on with me, I'm not going to go into that, but in our county, they wanted us to give information about what made us like a category 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we're talking about like some serious HIPAA violations. Okay, so we were, you know, told to give our information, but under the idea that we would be able to work from home so we wouldn't die or get sick. But that didn't happen the way it was. So I have 6 classes. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th. I'm sorry, this year I teach 6th, 7th remedial reading, and I have 6 periods. One of them, like I said, is simultaneous, or what we call the hybrid, where I have kids at home while I'm teaching like the same, like another group of kids live. Thankfully, my room's very tiny, and I turned in my paperwork to the county, so I only have room for 11 kids in my room. But I guess that I don't know what happened. Maybe some kids at the last minute decided to work from home, so now I have like about 10 kids in my room. So my room's really small, and we do rotations every day where we do software, and then they do small group with me, because we have like these foundational tests that pretty much creates a personalized pathway for learning. I haven't done like any small group yet, so I made lesson plans for next week to do the rotations. So far, my kids are sweet. They're 6th graders, the ones that I have physically. They're so cute and sweet. Sometimes they'll take their mask off, like to drink something, and I'm just like, put it back on soon. And I have them far away from me because, you know, my youngest son and my oldest son, they both have asthma, and I don't want anything to happen to them. So my students are sweet. I tell them like, hey, you know, just be careful. If you need to sneeze, keep your mask on. That's the point of it. When they leave, I just wipe down their computers. So I really feel for the other teachers that have to clean the computers every single day between 6 different classes. I don't know I don't know how I would do that. I won't have enough time. There's 4 minutes after the bell rings. There's 4 minutes for the kids to get to class. So then I'm like, if I were to do that, they'd be saying.
Monique, you're muted.
I know, the host, it said the host muted me. I don't know why, but that's what it says. Maybe I'm talking too much. But I just.
It wasn't me.
I don't know I don't know. It just, I find it terrifying because like I told you, I have like most of my classes except for one, they're all virtual. So my family's like, why aren't you able to, you know, work from home? And I'm like, I don't know. So I'm like trapped in my classroom all day, worrying about going to the restroom or, you know, because I know that, you know, I heard that it can be aerosolized. So like if someone is like, they don't have, they're asymptomatic. Let's say they urinate and they flush the toilets. You know, public school bathrooms have no lids. They flush and then it's in the air. So I smile, but I'm like really freaking out. In my head, I'm like, ah! So I've just been trying my best to stay safe, keep myself safe, keep my kids safe. And then my little ones, they don't go to school. They have school, but it's at home virtual. That's a whole nother mess where I became pretty much like the mini chancellor of my own home school because my husband, he doesn't know how to do this stuff. His job, thank God, they're letting him work from home, but it's a lot of prep, a lot of biting the bullet, a lot of trying to hold it together, and also like walking this tightrope between, do I just call in and be like, I quit, or write a letter of resignation, because I don't know what's going to happen after the first 9 weeks. Are they going to have the kids come back? And in Florida, I'm sure you guys have heard in the news, a lot of teachers have quit, you know, or they've taken leave of absence. So I have like, in one of my periods, I have almost 40 kids. I have exactly 38. By law in our county, and even with the new memorandum of understanding, it's called our MOU, that was in the news too. Because I teach remedial reading, these kids are really, really needing me more. The smaller the numbers, the better. I'm only supposed to have 32 kids capped, just capped at 32. I have 38. So, and it keeps growing. So I don't know what to do. I've been like bringing work home and, you know, doing all their data and just trying to, you know, do my job to the best of my ability. So, I mean, I don't know, just, I'm gonna pass the baton, whoever else wants to talk.
Can I add one more thing to what she's saying to make the contrast? She's talking about kids getting warnings for having masks. Where I am, there are no warnings. If I see a kid refusing to wear a mask, I call security, they're escorted
Oh,
out,
wow.
virtual option that day. Our administration is really serious about this. It's like fine, go sue us is pretty much and that's exactly what we want. Monique has not gotten that. So Monique is only
No.
one hybrid class and all the rest virtual. I'm teaching almost all face-to-face. I'm sure at both schools we got people teaching all different types of options. The face-to-face people are really in danger if they don't do the masking. Now it looks like all across the state that things have to go up for a vote again at various school boards. I know Pinellas County just voted to keep their mask mandate in the schools, but that was the first one to announce. That was on one of the teacher Facebook groups. I think ours is going to vote also, but these school districts are under tremendous pressure.
Yeah.
From Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis wants to pretend this all goes away because we are close to the presidential nomination. And even though Trump threw him under the bus and basically said, well, the Ron DeSantis' terrible leadership is why you've got problems in Florida, which is one of the few things I've ever said that has seen Trump say that I agree with. Ron DeSantis' modus operandi has been to try and be as solicitous of Trump as possible. And that's why there's tremendous political pressure coming on these school boards. And and we have it from the other direction too. We have all the anti-masker parents are the ones who show up at rallies and show up at people's offices. And so far, because the superintendent and the school board have been holding the line, the principals can also hold the line, and we're doing okay. But I think there's a lot of districts where that really isn't the case.
What part of Florida are you in, Alan?
Fort Myers, Lee County, Southwest.
Okay, so you're further south than Monique as well. Okay.
Right.
And Katie Morris, Kendall the Younger, you have arrived. So it's time for you to give us an idea of how you've been coping with this.
Yeah, well, obviously, actually, I'm going to take a completely different tone because coping with, for me, is very different since I treat all of the COVID people, and I have been trying actively to get it as much as possible since I think it's stupid to avoid it. But, and that's because I actually know the statistics and the aspects of the virus, and that 30% of people that actually get things that are colds are coronaviruses, not actually rhinoviruses. I know that what appears to be the original thing that everybody was afraid of is that they were finding that in China, the vast majority of individuals who were dying were males, aged 30 to 45. What they failed to mention is that virtually 100% of males aged 30 to 45 in China are smokers and work in a severely, poorly industrialized nation with extremely poor air quality conditions and a variety of other factors. As far as children, I just looked at the American Academy of Pediatrics, just to give you some numbers, to tell you that children account for about 10% of all cases of the coronavirus. And when we look at the number of deaths in the child population is actually significantly fewer than the number of deaths of children that get the flu. It's somewhere between 0 and 0.1%. Whereas in a bad case of the flu, let's say that you had the bird flu, obviously H1N1, which was particularly deleterious, you had a death rate sometimes in the neighborhood of 0.6%. So it's not as dangerous as people think, in my opinion. Who dies? The elderly. The elderly and people with significant other comorbid conditions. Is it transmitted as easily? No, it isn't transmitted as easily as the flu either. And we see what you are missing is that a huge majority of these individuals are asymptomatic. So what are the problems? Right now, we don't have a vaccine, so we can't really vaccinate those individuals. What could we have done to make things significantly different than we did? Well, one is to chastise China for being, terrible, terrible liars. Obviously, this is the third virus of this particular type that we've had to contend with in the last 20 years. SARS-1 and MERS being the other two, but because we were able to contain those and they didn't lie about the fact that it existed and allowed people to travel anywhere that they wanted to, we could have crushed it like we crushed everything else. I, at no point in time, have ever worried about myself getting it or what would happen to me if they did, because I'm a young, healthy individual, and young, healthy individuals do well. The vast majority of individuals, they say, oh my God, you know, we had young, healthy individuals. They have other underlying comorbid conditions that just haven't been identified. So we have a whole lot of these things. What do I do as far as treatment? Obviously, right now, remdesivir, you know, is the only medication that we have approved for it. Verdict is out. The evidence is not good as far as the tests that have been done. Some people will say that it works well. Other studies say that it doesn't work very well. The only thing that we currently use that seems to have some positive benefit is convalescent plasma. And convalescent plasma is the plasma that we take from individuals who have already turned up positive. Now, we find that the benefits of convalescent plasma require, what would be best is if you were able to give it to people before they had it, you know, so you could give some sort of acquired immunity, just like your mother gives you acquired immunity when you're an infant. But what we do is we try and give it as early, as soon as possible, as we have somebody showing any type of symptoms, anybody who's hospitalized. We use as much of it as we can. And we now are able to test for titers, so we can find out what the titers are of this and be able to have a better idea of something that will work. Does it work great? No, it doesn't work well. What we find is that it works best in individuals who are at the highest risk when you give it to them as early as possible. My take on convalescent plasma originally was that what you would really have to do is you'd have to give somebody somewhere between 10 and 50 units of plasma in order to be particularly beneficial. But what do? We give 1 unit or 2 units, depending on whether it's a high titer or a low titer. What are the things do we do? Well, we treat it like we treat any other respiratory illness. And so we treat it with steroids. We found that steroids obviously are the best for it. That's okay. Steroids are going to be the best thing that you can possibly do later in the course of disease. You don't want to use them early in the course of disease. So originally we were finding that those individuals that you treated with steroids would do less well. And that was, a lot of the reason was that is because we would use it early in the course of treatment. So what are you doing? Well, this patient doesn't have a significant respiratory issue yet, but they do have a virus. And their body needs to fight that. And of course, what do steroids do? Well, they stop the inflammatory response. They stop your ability to fight off the virus. So we were finding that those individuals tended to do less well. That's because we were using it too early. We weren't waiting long enough for the body to mount some sort of immune response. And then, and only if that immune response was not doing as well as we would like, then we use steroids in those individuals. Of the individuals that have died in my hospital, all of them were elderly with significant comorbid conditions. All of our young individuals have done well. We did have one patient who was in her 40s who passed away. Again, why did she pass away? She was developmentally disabled. She had significant diabetes, was massively overweight, had significant respiratory issues as well as cardiovascular issues, and unfortunately, she just did not recover. The other individuals that we have had die quickly are all in very, very bad shape to begin with, and even some individuals that are in their 90s, we've had survive quite well because they didn't have comorbid conditions. They didn't feel great for a while, but they did well, and they actually never even met criteria to be able to be on steroids. They never got so bad off that they needed any type of respiratory treatment. So anyway, that's my very quick, down and dirty take on what's going on, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has them. I also have a variety of other statistics because, of course, I need to know how many people have gotten the coronavirus I work in Pinellas County. In Pinellas County, in the last period of time, Pinellas County has actually done very well. Hillsborough County has not done well. Obviously, Orange County did not do well. We looked at Miami, Dade, and Broward all did very, very poorly. So those places with people that travel a lot, that had an international airport and had a high population, didn't do well. My area, where people tend to be lower income, don't travel a whole lot, and are spread out farther, has done very well in the younger population. Okay.
I jump in because I violently disagree with a lot of what you said here. There's a lot more. There's a lot more to look at as perspective than just not dying. It turns out that COVID is correlated with a lot of effects on blood clotting cascade. So there's blood effects, there's kidney effects, there's liver effects, there's brain effects. There's all sorts of things which you can see with the cases that are hospitalized. So if we're talking about kids, which what you were originally disagreeing with what Monique and I are on my perspective, how do we know, given how new this virus is, that there aren't going to be some of those problems caused by autoimmune conditions, caused by anything else, caused by recurrence of the virus later on in their life? I want to see more than they just don't die. Second off, kids are very good at passing it on to other people. There were studies that were done early in Wuhan, which were a very small number of people, and also with a different form of the virus. That was before the mutation that led to the virus that's essentially taken over. That's most of what we see in the United States today, that said that kids were less likely to pass the virus. Well, guess what? The bigger studies, I think there was one down out of Britain, showed that kids over the age of 10 are just as likely to pass the virus as anybody older than that. And even younger than the age of 10, it was only a twofold difference. So they're shorter, they don't cough in your face as much. And they have less breath because their lungs are smaller. That's probably one or two of those, or maybe both, are the explanation. But even then, it was only a twofold difference. There are unknown effects because this particular virus is still very new. I am not willing to gamble and bet that everybody under the age of 40 is going to be fine just because they don't die. I think there's a lot more that you have to look out in terms of health outcomes. And when you looked at the two previous pandemics that were due to coronaviruses, and you said they haven't been a big problem, maybe in the United States. Try asking a Saudi what MERS was like. Try asking anyone in Asia what SARS was like. They were huge deals. They just didn't get as far as the United States in any significant numbers. The blaming China for this, okay, it's a bureaucratic system. Okay, there were some problems in getting the information out to begin with. But the reason why the United States is suffering so much from this pandemic is you have a president that didn't do anything for a long time. Just about every country in the world had a national response. You want to look at a good response, look at Taiwan. They happen to have a vice president who's also one of the world's leading epidemiologists. So he doesn't have to take the scientists seriously. He is the scientist, and they came up with probably the world's best response. But even anywhere other than the United States, just about. I mean, Brazil has been just as bad. Russia and Mexico were both quite bad. But basically, every other developed country did a far better job than we did because they took the scientists seriously. If we want to start pointing fingers at slow information movement out of China and saying that's the major reason we have the epidemic here, I think we ought to point the fingers at terrible leadership, lack of a national strategy. And I think that it's still absolutely essential to get these numbers down. Florida has been about the worst in the world for a long time. We should not be the basket case that the other countries are looking at and saying, how could this be so possibly mismanaged here? And although I am not disputing the actual numbers you're throwing out there, what I am disputing is the perspective you're putting on these numbers, and how we contextualize something is every bit as important as the numbers themselves.
I agree. I'm going to step in on that because, yes, looking at the death rates and stuff like that, but one of the other things that you could look at when, in terms of utilizing kids, again, data is data, and ultimately, that can be spun in multiple different ways and can be manipulated multiple different ways, and either support or negate a particular point of view that wants to be presented, which is very sad that that's happening. Okay, and that's not on you. I'm just mean in general. I'm just referring to the general state that we are in. That's part of the problem of not utilizing the numbers accurately, not even aggregating the numbers accurately, because that gives them a whole different spin. So that's important. But when you look at the issue with kids and how kids have either spread or don't spread the disease, remember that when we're sitting down there, let's talk about context. Where were the kids? When we were first saying that kids don't spread it, we have to worry about the kids. Where were the kids? They were home because everybody was on quarantine for a hot second. So the kids weren't out in school. They weren't out in the playgrounds. They weren't out in Publix. They weren't supposed to be out partying. But every time they went out in partying groups, even around graduation time, look what happened. We had a major outbreak among the kids and among the adults that they came in interaction with. So I think one of the things to look at is, where were the kids before we just use the raw data? Okay, well, based on the raw data, this is kids don't do this, but where were the kids? They weren't intermingling. They weren't going in and spreading among other people and then taking it home to their houses, and then their families aren't going out to their social events. So I think, number one, let's look at the categories and kind of just look at the framing picture, which I think is what one of the things you're trying to say. The other thing, again, is that I agree with you on the long-term effects, because it's just not about the number of deaths. Okay, so let's take 10. 10 is an easy number. So let's just say out of 10 people who get it, 3-4 people die. Okay, of those 3-4 people, okay, this certain amount of people had pre-existing whatever. But yes, we are having deaths among young people and among children and among seemingly healthy people who have never had a medical issue. They eat healthy, they're athletes, XYZ, and they're GONE, gone. Okay, so but at the same time, when you look at that, it's the lingering effects. We know that people who have COVID, especially those who got it bad, a lot of them are having emotional, mental issues after the fact. I mean, just for them to even talk about it just brings them into a state of, can you imagine if somebody have it really bad and the sensation they had of drowning, or if they had to deal with all the blood clotting issues and just a constant terror of, am I going to be dead? Am I going to be dead? And all that they had to cope with. So I think I agree with you 100% that it's more than just a death thing. And I think maybe that's part of the US problem, because for some people, when they look at it, well, nobody in my family died. Or if they get it, oh, I didn't die. Or that's on television. That's not true information. And I'm sure the doctor might have had people that tell him it's fake, but from my perspective, again, I'm now looking at it from a national, regional, state. I mean, every perspective you could think of, since that is what I do every day in and day out from the public health level. It's the way the information is being presented and how the numbers are being manipulated is creating a challenge for us. Definitely creating a challenge for us.
I just want to say one thing. Yeah, it's true, absolutely, that those initial reports, when they were trying to say that they thought that children didn't spread the illness, I thought that was completely asinine. It made absolutely no sense at all for any virus. I always thought that it was stupid, and it obviously didn't apply. I mean, children, of course, they're going to spread the virus. Just because you didn't demonstrate that they spread it doesn't mean anything. And as far as children being out and about, actually Australia at no point in time quarantined their children, because they said, we're never going to do this. Education is far more important. So they were still out and about. But that initial data came from, again, from poorly designed studies out of China. And every time that anybody said anything about any of those original studies in China, I always just said, I don't believe it. I don't believe any of it. And I'll find out what happens when I start getting some information out of Italy, the second largest place to get hit, in order to get a better idea. And then, of course, we had a variety of things that we've shown clearly are not the case. Now, as far as morbidity, yes, morbidity is bad. Clotting effects, well, again, that's only because you don't understand how many other diseases cause these massive clotting effects. Anytime anybody becomes septic, they have a significant risk for developing disseminated intravascular coagulopathy. Yeah. Under normal circumstances, we don't treat those individuals. In COVID, we found that is actually a little bit worse. And some of that may be because what's actually happening is some coronaviruses will actually not just block the lung tissue, but will actually bind to hemoglobin and kick the iron out of it. So that then we have the problem is not necessarily that you can't breathe enough, it's that it doesn't matter how much you breathe, you can't transfer that oxygen because the red blood cells can't hold the oxygen.
Exactly.
And since red blood cells hold 95% of your oxygen, that becomes a problem. So yes, we do see a great many people that will actually be re-hospitalized about 2 weeks after, and that's because that's how long it has taken for the tissues that have died from that coagulation throughout the various tissues in your body to finally degrade to the point that they are releasing a huge number of toxins into your body, and that causes a significant stress on both your liver and your kidneys. Does this happen with other things? Absolutely, it happens with other things as well. Does this seem to have any long-term effects? No, we find that people with disseminated intravascular coagulopathy do not have any more significant increased risk of morbidity, mortality later on in life. We don't seem to see that they have other types of issues that they have under normal circumstances. For the most part, these individuals recover so long as they treat themselves well. Can we say that that's the case in this particular instance? No, not necessarily. We don't know that. It may become a problem. To date, however, we do find that once those people come back and they get their supportive care, they tend to do okay after that. As far as the mental illness, I think that that's an aspect of mass hysteria that comes with the greatest amount of fear that everybody has given, inappropriately given to something that is dangerous.
That I have to disagree with. I'm sorry, because not only do I see patients or talk to people, because again, on my end as being public health and some other stuff that I do, is part of that is looking at the after effects and having those conversations and stuff like that. So to just, I'm sorry, that I'm going to have to disagree with. They say, well, it's just because people have blatant hysteria. No, because some of these people are medical professionals just like you, and as medical professionals, I don't only just do medical professional, I work on the scary side of it. I do trauma. I do the stuff where you have somebody bleeding out and you practically want to poke your finger there and hold the heck to keep it from bleeding. So when you're talking about your medical people, our job as medical people is to save lives. That's what we do. We go into this to save lives. And one of the most traumatic things that can happen to a medical person is that they lose a life. And now they're not just losing one life, they're losing multiple lives. So never mind if it happens to them and they can't get better. They've had it now for 3, 4, 5, 6 months and they still can't catch their breath. They still can't stand up and go get something. It's an emotional distress. It's post-traumatic stress. Literally, they are going through post-traumatic stress, and post-traumatic stress is not something made up because somebody tells you to be afraid. So that I was absolutely, I love you, but I'll have to disagree with you.
I'm going to agree with Ruby.
With you on that one.
I'm going to agree with Ruby and disagree with Kendall for a completely separate reason. One of the early symptoms is lack of smell and lack of taste.
Yes.
Now, that is at the level of processing. That is a neural effect. There are definite effects in the brain tissue. We got good biological evidence for that. It is doing something in the brain. So to say that, to dismiss an epidemic that isn't even a year old with saying there are going to be no long-term effects on people's mental health if we know it's doing something in the brain, I think is acting in the complete vacuum and lack of information. And I think it's very dangerous to just be assuming that. I mean, and as for the large number of people, as you said before, that have many other conditions, I think that's kind of like looking at the people who died in the Titanic and seeing how many had high blood pressure. Well, I guess it's high blood pressure and an iceberg that killed them. No, it's this is COVID-19 that is causing these new problems and causing a massive increase of death in this country that we know about, sickness in this country that we know about, all sorts of mental issues that we know about, and probably a whole lot of things that we don't know about. And not take this seriously, I think, is insane.
Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to piggyback on is that people often try to compare this novel virus to, you know, the Spanish flu or those other lovely things we've experienced as humans. But they say things like, oh, my grandmother, she went to, you know, she kept on working and living and she was sick for days. Why are we doing this? Well, we know better, you do better. Okay, we have the means to teach. We have the means to have a freaking conference virtually to make sure that there are less deaths. So what bothers me is, I know you're coming from, Kendall, and that's why I keep giggling and kiki-keying on the camera, because you're young, I'm young, but we are not invincible. And unfortunately, one of my cousins on my mother's side, his name's Alex, he's in the hospital. He's young, he's healthy, and he's fit. He lifts weights for a living, he runs, he's healthy man. But he has a raging fever with COVID. He can still breathe, thank God, but he has a fever. It's not going away. And if it keeps increasing, his brain will be fried. So I know what you're saying, but with the way you're coming across, it almost seems as if you're being insensitive. And that bothers me. I know that may not be your intention, and that may not be your intent, but the impact, I feel it. It's a whole mood. So, like, I have not gotten sick yet, thank God. I know family members have gotten sick. Even if that didn't happen, I would still have the empathy to say, my God, these people have lost their family members. People are afraid, rightfully so. Let's all do our best. Let's all do our part to make sure people don't get sick. Wash your hands, wash your effing hands. You know, there's no reason. Wear your mask, wear your freaking mask. I mean, the other day, was it like a month ago, honey? My husband went to the store. This woman comes up to him and says, let me borrow your phone. And he's like, no, I don't even know you. Leave me alone. But even if this was before COVID-19, even if COVID-19 was a thing, who goes with a road stranger and asks them for their phone? Who does that? Weirdos, entitled weirdos. I'm like, lady, what are you doing? Why are you asking for my phone? But it's like, no mask. And I feel like it's this sense of this like arrogant sense of entitlement to just impose yourself in someone else's personal space. And it's a matter of, there's no empathy. I get it, you want your freedom, America, but why can't you have some self-respect for yourself and other people? How is wearing a mask hurting you from having your freedom? I don't get it. And I will leave it at that. But Trump gets passed.
And
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely, I agree with you as far as the entitlement. The entitlement is constantly a problem. And just because I do want to get it doesn't mean that I would infect that on anybody else. And of course, I take all of my precautions, and I do. And I do all the things that I can. But they won't let me lick any of the patients who have it, unfortunately. Although I've tried. No, I haven't really. But I would love to, because I mean, ultimately, I want the immunity and I want the experience. And I believe that people get sick. It's unfortunate. It's terrible. I do everything I can to make them better. I understand that you get sick. You know, it's like the old Buddhist mantra that, or the monks. I am of the nature to get sick. I am of the nature to get old, and I'm of the nature to die. I accept these things. I don't worry about these things. I do my best. I mean, obviously, I would avoid Ebola, you know, because it, you know, terrible, terrible thing. And deadly to everybody, you know, self-limiting, deadly to everybody. But of course, I would never try to give it to anybody or be insensitive. But I think that, you know, a lot of the things that happened, honestly, you know, when we first quarantined, I said, you've got two options. The only two options that are ever going to work. One option is quarantine all the high-risk people and let everybody else go about their business. The other option is quarantine everyone until 2 months after the last case has ever been identified. And those are the only things that were ever going to work. What we have done now is slow it. Are we decreasing the number of people that get it? Maybe, but ultimately what we've done is we've made the whole entire thing take years instead of months.
Kendall, I would totally disagree with that, because there's two issues, and I'm going to go to the science here. The first issue is the R factor. How many, that's a key point in the modeling of the disease. How many people does one person infect? And in the European countries and in the Asian countries, uniform wearing of masks with a national mask law that is enforced has dramatically cut the R factor down to fairly close to way under 1. And as a result, without a vaccine, without herd immunity, the rates of COVID went way, way down because you just reduced the number of people that the average individual spread it to way less than 1. The second thing that I would like to point to is a study of the 4 common cold coronaviruses that you mentioned. And it turns out they were looking using antibody tests on the plasma to find when these people got reinfected. And as early as 6 months after the initial infection, some of them were getting reinfected, and then 1 year after, a lot of them were reinfected. So is your plan to lick somebody every 6 months and come down with this every 6 months, and then maybe eventually you'll get extremely sick? I think that's a really dumb plan. I would not try to do that.
All right.
Yeah, obviously we don't know
open it up
what the
here
ability
because
is
we're
going to
running
be
out
as
of
far
time.
as. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we don't know what the. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey. Yeah, we're running out of time is the problem. And I know you're probably going to have a really good response to it. We're supposed to keep this at 50 minutes. We're right on. There's been some really interesting stuff going on in the chat, and you can do.
You can go a little over the 50 minutes. We just have to be done by the hour. Okay? So you can go over a little bit.
Higher authority has spoken.
I am the schedule goddess, so yes, I can say that. You can go over to like 6:57, 5 minutes, 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I've seen a lot of comments or statistics or in comments in the news that they're not sure that it's going to give you much immunity, and they're not sure it's going to last. So is there more or new information on that?
I've been following this pretty closely, and it looks, I mean, you have to realize it's a brand new epidemic, so it takes a while to get these studies. But it looks very much like if there is an antibody response, there is also a memory B cell response, there is also a T cell response. So it all seems to be correlated. Now, whether that is going to be correlated with not getting it again is anybody's guess because we haven't had enough time to see. But if you want to look at SARS, and if you want to look at the, SARS would be the best comparison. It was indeed correlated with not getting it again. So it looks like, now the confusion in the mainstream media is when these antibody, since all they could really measure easily was the antibody response, that was what was coming out first. And anybody who's ever done immunology, which I have back in my grad student days, can tell you is that there is a certain window in which you see high levels of antibodies, and then you don't see it in the blood to any great extent anymore. But with the T cell response and with the memory B cell response, that could still be correlated with immunity. So that's what the public was not understanding is they were essentially speaking to the scientist crowd when they say, this is what the antibody's done, this is all we've been able to do so far, and people were trying to draw broad general conclusions from that. So the big answer to what you're saying is we haven't had enough time to see enough reinfections to see if getting it once is going to have long-term protection. But if you want to look at that study I just cited on the common cold coronaviruses, if you want to look at SARS, I think if we have a vaccine, it will be good for a year. You'll be getting a shot every year, but not a big deal because that's what we do with flu anyway.
And I think, again, it comes back to how is the information presented and how is people understanding of the information, or drawing conclusions from information, drawing the wrong conclusions from information that's provided. That's such a big deal. Messaging is such a huge issue in this whole thing that we're dealing with. And the bottom line is, I personally have concerned over a rushed vaccine. I do. I'm sorry. There's nobody in the, again, because I've dealt with stuff not just in the US. I've dealt with stuff internationally. So I've dealt with WHO and United Way and PAHO and Southern Command and all these things that do international things and international programs and healthcare and stuff like that. And there's nobody that can convince me we're not trying to rush this vaccine. We're always trying to rush a vaccine in an emergency like this, but I'm concerned about the political pressures on the actual science. And so I think that's the other issue that we from a public health standpoint or anything else is going to be coping with is people who's coming up and they're like, I'm not going to take it because I don't trust it. And then, so what's the purpose? If we can't build that truth saying and that trust factor along the way, even if we had a valid vaccine, people are not trusting it for other reasons. So the messaging and what we're doing, we just have to work very hard. But I think it's going to be a concern. If we have a vaccine before next year, it's going to be a concern for people to.
I think we're going to have to stop you there for a second.
Okay, just a second. I just discovered there is nothing else in this room. You can continue some if you want to. If not, I suggest taking it over to the con suite. So you can either
I'm happy
stay
to hang out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to stay here.
I'm
Okay, good. Yeah, there's nothing else in here until Zoom decides to cut us off. You can talk. And if you need to go do things, everybody will understand. I wanted to make one comment about it. It was like, obviously what I'm seeing is that I hear what Alan's saying and what Monique is saying and what Ruby's saying and what my son is saying. And what I'm getting is a big part of what the problem we're having with this is that we don't know enough.
Exactly.
And everybody, every one of you knows some of it, but nobody knows all of it.
Right. Right now we have different hands on the elephant. We don't even know how big this elephant is because it's so friggin' new.
Mhm.
I'm a CMOS myself, and while I'm, that's the limit of my experience besides that, but, just coming in fresh like this, yeah, we're getting different data points from 3 different people on multiple angles from this, but because the mutations are still happening as we speak,
Yep.
and even with the vaccine that comes out, from what I've been reading myself, it's like the mutations are still ahead of any vaccine that comes out. And the fact that the US is so irresponsible as far as with the masking and all these cases that are continuing, the mutations are going to continue. So until we can actually corral that down, the virus has got us. That's just my perspective here on the Texas border, and me, my knowledge as a certified medical office specialist.
Actually, I can speak
that's my 2 cents.
I can speak to the mutations because I'm pretty much up on that the scientific literature there. The reason why there's a lot less mutation here than with flu is because this virus does repair of its genome. That's really, really rare for a virus. Viruses generally don't do that. But this is actually a very long virus. It's 30,000 base pairs, which most viruses are way shorter than that.
Whoa.
It would have died out a long time ago if it didn't have
30,000? That boggles.
Yeah. Well, there's a protein that is bifunctional. One half of it does, when I say messenger RNA, if people remember high school biology,
I know what you mean as far as
that is used to make protein. So it's the information for making protein. This
Right.
positive strand RNA virus, so that what's in the virus is actually the mRNA. So normally in humans and other eukaryotes, it gets a cap on the end of the RNA, which improves stability, and it also helps recruiting it to the protein making machine. That happens with this virus. It makes its own, but the other half of the protein that's responsible for that is what's called an exonuclease. It cuts DNA out when it's wrong. So because it can cut DNA out when it's wrong, I actually am being a little looser. It cuts DNA period, it cuts RNA period, but the rate of reincorporating the correct nucleotide is faster. The end result of that is it corrects itself. That's why we have so much less mutation with the virus than with anything else, because mutation is largely errors in copying. And if you're going to correct your errors, you're going to have a lot less errors. Now, there was one really huge important mutation. That one really huge important mutation was, I think the G, I can't remember the number D, which took a glutamate, glutamate and the RNA coding for glutamate made it into a glycine. So before that happened, you have the Wuhan virus, which had very different characteristics. This initially was the virus that was some of the first cases in New York, but then this particular virus's one mutation made the virus replicate to a lot higher level in people's respiratory tract. Because it went to a lot higher level in the respiratory tract, it was a lot more contagious. So that's why the earliest studies out of Wuhan are not cross-interpreted happened since, because that one virus is not the virus we have now. We have nearly 100% of the virus in this country, according to a study of like 6,000 genomes of virus patients. Almost all of them were this mutation. This is a mutation that took over Italy, then it took over the rest of the United States. The very, very first case in the United States were the Wuhan virus. After that, it was this one mutation. But that one mutation, that's what we're dealing with right now. Because of the correcting function, we are not getting a lot of mutations. This virus is evolving very, very slowly for a virus. But we've pretty good hopes for vaccine working. So generally with vaccine, like look at AIDS, for example. We were told initially, if you've been all the way back then, there was going to be a virus back in 1987. Then there was going to be a vaccine back in 87. Then there was going to be a vaccine in the 90s. Then there was going to be a vaccine in the others. We still don't have a vaccine because AIDS is a really huge problem and hard to deal with because it has so many different ways in which it interacts with our biology. The reason why Fauci is so optimistic is this looks like a conventional virus. So this is a conventional virus that is mutating very, very slowly. And the entire world has put crap loads of money into it. So the ones that Trump has thrown billions at are brand new experimental technology. The Chinese are hedging their bet. They're using 1950s technology too. They have a chemically killed virus, which is 1950s technology. That's one of the ones that's the furthest ahead that's in type 3. And if you can believe Trump, he said he doesn't really give a damn where it's made. He will buy it if it works. I think that is one of the few rational things I've heard out of Trump. And so I think that Fauci's optimism is well-founded. I think sometime in 2021, maybe 2022 at the outset, I think he is right to be willing to place bets on there being a vaccine, even though vaccine development is usually a 20-year process. I think if you throw absolute shitloads of money into it and get the entire world working on it, that kind of makes it faster.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Can I ask a question as a totally non-medical person here? Because we've got all this medical knowledge sitting here. So what does this mean in the long run? I mean, do you guys expect that we're going to be like wearing masks and running around scared of catching this virus for the next couple of years? Or
Can I answer as a science fiction writer? Yeah, as a science fiction writer, I think I do a lot of near future stuff. You look ahead to trends, and I think there are 3 basic existential threats to the human race. One of them is the climate catastrophe. The second one is nuclear war. And the third one is worldwide pandemics. So I think there will be more pandemics. There will be more viruses coming up. This particular one, I'd be surprised if we're wearing masks past 2022. I'd be thinking that if it ends in 2021 and we're not wearing masks, that would not surprise me. But this is going to come again. We've already had SARS, MERS, and this just within the last 20 years. I think it's going to come again. I think it's going to come again more frequently. You want to be scared about something? Look at disturbed ecosystems that are on the borderline of cities, like where I live. So the Burmese python has eaten just about all the mammals in the Everglades. There is a virus called Everglades virus that is spread by mosquitoes. Well, the mosquitoes that used to be in the Everglades that are native didn't go into cities, and the deer and the rabbits that were bit mostly by that mosquito could not replicate the virus. Well, guess what? 90% of the mammal population is gone. The only 3 things in the world that can replicate this virus are 2 small rodents that still exist that don't seem to be too tasty to these snakes and us. and exotic invasive mosquitoes have come in that can live just perfectly fine in neighborhood areas. So I think Naples or Miami at some point in the next 20 years is going to be the site of the beginning of the Everglades virus pandemic, and that's just something we know about.
Well,
So
this, you know, it's
What?
kind of what we call in emergency management, we call cascading effect, you know,
Right.
a cause and effect. And not only do you have that, but now we decided, okay, well, we have that problem. So let's just go ahead and modify the mosquitoes and give them some of our zombie mixture blend or whatever craziness went and do. So now we've gone and genetically modified these mosquitoes, and we're going to release them. And that's going to take care of the situation. I mean, I think history have taught us that every time we mess with nature to fix some part of nature, we end up with a bigger problem that we then can control.
Yes.
So that, for me, from, you know, talking about the mosquitoes, that's a major concern I have. And just talk about re-emergence. We know that over the last couple decades, we're having a re-emergence of things that have been quite locked down for some time. And so among that is, as we know, we've had a couple episodes of plague is also out there that we're watching. You know, they're what we call black swan and gray rhino events. In other words, additional cascading events in just the climate and the weather and what's happening with the weather cycle changing. And we know that weather cycles and all the crap that comes with them also impact the natural life, stir things up out of the soil, you know, releases, you know, it's just like a never ending cycle. So I think I agree with you. If it ain't one thing, it's going to be another. We call it, in our world, we call it, you know, kind of like what's the issue of the day, the, you know, flavor of the day, you know, because if it ain't one thing, it's another thing. And they're coming faster and faster and closer together. Before, you had a major disaster and you had a long period of time to go through your cycle. Now it's like you have it today and by tomorrow you have another one. So that's yeah. It's
the only thing that I disagree with is
interesting
on the genetically engineered mosquitoes. I actually support that very strongly, and I know some of the people who are monitoring it. I think allowing West Nile or St. Louis encephalitis or dengue to spread without Florida is a terrible idea. What they're doing is they're eradicating exotic invasive mosquitoes. So the situation is already a disaster. When your situation is already a disaster, trying things that have some level of risk is reasonable. And I think the paradigm that says that in Florida you can do that is the eradication of the Melaleucas. Normally, in a pristine environment like something right next to the Everglades, going out and introducing a foreign insect species would be crazy. But that's how they controlled the Melaleucas. They went back to its native zone in Australia. They got beetles that would attack it, and then they released it under controlled conditions, did it right. The Melaleucas are almost gone, and the insects did not become weedy. Given that that's happening in Southwest Florida, and given that this is Oxitec, which I think is an excellent British company, I had met some of the principals involved in that during my science days, I am a lot less worried about that. I mean, if you have something that's already a disaster and already impending an even bigger disaster, trying genetic modification of mosquitoes in a targeted way with responsible people doing it, I think is a good idea. And I also think doing it in Florida is a good idea, because normally these things happen somewhere in the developing world and it's imposed upon people. Africans are watching this very closely. They are much happier that this happens in Florida, where you have things like continuous Wi-Fi and you could stay in a hotel in Naples or Miami when you're doing the research. They are watching it. It will be applied in Africa, which has bigger problems than we do, which is the test zone for all this, if it's shown to work. So that's the only thing I'm disagreeing with what you're saying. I think the genetically engineered mosquitoes project in Florida, the ones that are going on, are actually extremely well thought out and are far, far better option than doing nothing.
Well, part of in my role that I do and what we do is we actually manage the mosquito control program as well, which is very fascinating. When I first took this job, I never, I came to learn more about mosquitoes than I ever imagined. I mean, the things done every single day to monitor the mosquito population and everything like that. So that comment is my personal feeling. That's just how I feel about genetically modifying things. That's my personal viewpoint, not a scientific one. My personal viewpoint on scientific stuff, messing with stuff. Just to clarify.
Messing with stuff.
I
And when they
think we were
crossed
learning
Hyacinthe
more
and
from a
managed to make
variety
maize,
of
that was messing with stuff.
errors that we made, and we can do a much better job of those types of things now. I think that, yes, we will continue to have epidemics. I think that hopefully we will have learned two very important lessons from what we've gone through. Number one, you got to stop it where it starts, if at all possible, which means stopping China from eating bats and pangolins. That would be a significant advancement, as pangolins and the bats are the significant carriers of coronavirus and the greatest source of mutation from it in order to transfer it to humans. And then the second thing is that we need to stop looking at the world as, oh yeah, that's Africa's problem with disease. Oh yeah, that's China's problem with disease. And we need to do a much better job of studying really all of the viruses that are out there and doing a better job of potentially even immunizing ourselves long before there's a chance for those to enter the human population.
One thing that I want to observe is it could clearly be misinterpreted as racism, especially since this is being recorded. The Chinese are not eating bats. There are natural bat populations there that are probably one of the sources of them. I've read some papers on the evolution of this virus. Pangolins are also mostly used in herbal medicine, and that was banned.
Correct.
The Chinese responsibly banned those. But I think there is a third unknown source, because if you look at our virus, recombination created this virus by taking what looks like the pangolin domain in the spike virus for interacting with the receptor, and the site in which the virus shell gets cut up was taken from probably other bat populations through natural recombination events with probably a third host that could host all of these things, which may be another bat species, I don't know. But it's not a matter of people having bat soup. It's a matter of living close to natural areas. So where I would agree with your general point that we got to be proactive, I think there's two things that need to go on. I think we need to be very concerned about places where urbanization is right next to natural areas like Southwest and Southern Florida. And I also think that there should be a lot more study on possible zoonotic infections, where an animal virus can jump into human. And that is happening. There's a lot of that's being funded internationally. So I think there's a lot more money that should be going into these areas where you see urbanization right at the edge of wild areas. The Chinese have actually been quite responsible, even though it was proven genetically that these wild animal markets had nothing to do with the virus. That was an initial charge. They've still shut them down because it potentially could have had something to do with it. So I think to say that the Chinese are being irresponsible, especially given what our country has done, because I can't posit Trump as a model for the whole world. I think it is not a good idea politically, because it looks like bias, and it's just plain not true. There have been mistakes made, and there have been bad decisions pretty much worldwide. And I don't think any one country is to blame for this epidemic.
Can I ask a question real quick? Would that be possible?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
So I had a question. This is to probably the science experts, maybe Alan or Kendall. What do you think of, in the spirit of doing the best we can today, besides just mask, receiving a live attenuated vaccine? I'm thinking the MMR, the BCG is not here in America. That there's been some recent evidence that tends to produce something, well, you guys are probably more familiar with than I am, myeloid-derived suppressor cells that promote non-specific pathogen defense. What do you think of that?
Well,
it's hard to say with this.
Cytokine storm is something that happens with the COVID patients that sends some of them over the edge, where this non-specific response gets amplified massively. I'd say that you might be playing with fire here. And as Ruby said, I wouldn't want to race this. I'd want to see what the long-term trials on something like that are. I think that there is potential. It's something that should be looked at, but I'm not going to race to fly to Europe and get BCG tomorrow.
I agree the same thing. Again, in terms of exactly what you said, the potential responses to it is so potentially dangerous to the patient, to the person that has that kind of response, I wouldn't want to try it. Not without proper study and really understanding where that goes. It's almost like, remember what happened with us with, bringing back out the smallpox vaccine and stuff like that. I think we really need to know what we're doing before we do something like that. That's a really, really scary prospect.
But in some cases, the MMR is, very widely commonly given here in America. I use the BCG as another example, but some of the studies seem to indicate countries with high MMR vaccination rates tend to have lower, morbidity or effects from COVID-19. And there's a theory that that's what helps kids to be better protected against it. They're more recent vaccinations, since those cells tend to only last about a year or two, is my understanding.
MMR is given to kids routinely. I think that's generally considered safe. I think that's important. Kids should get it. But an extra MMR dose, you don't know that that's not going to trigger off cytokines. It's going to have this positive feedback amplification like you see with the bad COVID cases. I want to see the studies first before I would recommend giving that in extra doses to adults.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I disagree. I wouldn't worry about the MMR in particular. Adults frequently get MMR. Because we don't know whether or not they've had it as younger, because they don't keep good records of those types of things. Although under normal circumstances, we expect that they are. I personally have been vaccinated with so many things going on now, because in my hospital and in my system, and what the Joint Commission requires of the hospitals is not just that everybody is vaccinated and we have the appropriate records to show it, because I have all of my records, but I have to have titers done on a regular basis. And I've had to have numerous additional Tdaps. I've had the hepatitis B series 3 times now. I've had a host of these other things. The MMR is fine. The BCG, Garin, that one, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with it. It's a little bit more questionable. But as far as the vaccines that we currently have, the likelihood of being able to develop any sort of cytokine storm is virtually non-existent. Do we get immune responses? Yes. Do some people feel poorly? Yes. But that's a relatively small portion of the population. And in order to get something like a cytokine storm or something else like that, you really have to have, as we were talking about in the numbers, you have to have that replication phase. Because you don't have that replication phase, you're never getting enough of that to really cause a significant problem. The only problems that you ever do have is sometimes those will interact with your PPD test, because you have modified your immune response, and now your PPD test sometimes will cause you to have additional things and show up like you have tuberculosis or other types of problems like that.
Yeah, but isn't that exactly what I was saying? That in the case that you have a severe COVID infection, isn't there a possibility this could make it worse, that you would want to see the studies to make it?
Under those circumstances, is it likely to make it worse?
Wouldn't you want to see the studies?
I would say we would treat it like we treat all other vaccinations. We don't give them to people who are sick, because you are less likely to get the immunity that you're looking for because you're busy fighting off something else. And yeah, you can cause people to feel even worse than they do. But that's why, most of the time they ask you every time they're going to give you a vaccination. Would you do it in advance? Yes. Would you do it once somebody has it? No.
Other questions? Somebody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I kind of.
Sorry, got to get rid of this. I got an Amber Alert.
I think we
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah, we all do.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, aren't you going to rush over to suburban Gainesville right now and apprehend that person?
Okay. Anyway, I think my son had a lot of good points, and of course everybody else did too. But I'd have to say, Kendall, think about you mentioned people who dying having comorbid conditions, but somebody else brought up a very good point that, yeah, but they wouldn't have died then if they hadn't gotten this. And the other point would be, in the mathematics panel today, we talked about exponential decay and exponential growth. And yeah, all we've done is, and we should have done it much better, obviously. We've only slowed the advance of it. And but that was the point. In Italy, they didn't. And I have friends working at Sacco Hospital, and I should see if I can find it. I'll paraphrase it anyway. My friend was writing to me at the peak of it. Sacco Hospital was in Milan, northern Italy. There was COVID-19 central, and they had cleared out it's a huge campus, and they had cleared it out, and it was only COVID-19. And she wrote to me how they were having to make these constant decisions about who would get the ventilators, who would get the care once they advanced to ARDS. Now, without care, if you advance to ARDS is acute respiratory distress syndrome. And once you advance to that, you die if you're not treated. That's essentially it. If you're treated, you have a 50-50 chance, is the best they've done these days. And steroids act, once you've advanced to ARDS, steroids don't really help very much. And that's too late by then. And so far as it's only with comorbid conditions. What part of the adult American population does not have a COVID, comorbidity?
Yeah, especially
you do, son. I'd hate to have you getting it.
Yeah.
I have a question too, to all the doctors around.
Yeah.
Have you
So
guys
I don't think Kendall was saying that we shouldn't do anything. He gave examples of what would have been the best, even though I think it would have been kind of impossible to just quarantine anybody with any comorbid condition or who's liable completely away from the rest of the population. And the problem is, again, with the kids, with everybody, if there's a whole area of mathematics called disaster theory. And many things like these pandemics, once you reach a certain concentration, it becomes exponential growth. It just blooms, and there's nothing anybody's going to be able to do about it. It's going to get tremendous. And that's what we were trying to at least delay and avoid and draw it out. And yeah, I kind of felt the same way, Kendall. At first, like, well, I'm not in too bad condition, except, for having cancer and having had a heart attack and have, 2 coronary arteries 90% blocked. Other than that, I'm pretty good. And I'm only 69. And so I'd rather just get it and get it over with and then not have to worry. Of course, wait till I no longer be contagious. But it probably wasn't a good idea. And I still don't think it is. And I still don't think we did enough to quarantine people, and that we should be doing better now too. We're socially distancing.
I have a question to the doctors in the panel. Have you guys looked in at all to, especially those who are presenting with respiratory symptoms and some of the coronary symptoms, have there been any trials utilizing NAC, the N-acetylcholine cysteine?
N-acetylcysteine?
Yes.
N-acetylcysteine we haven't used specifically for that. We only use it for 2 things, Tylenol toxicity and liver failure. So in some of those individuals that have had significant liver failure, absolutely you have used it. We have used it because of its ability to regenerate, glutathione transferase and other things that are going on. As far as using it specifically, no. Have we found, I mean, you know, everybody and their brother, of course, has a variety of things that they like to use as supplements. Can it hurt? No, it certainly can't hurt. Is it beneficial? Well, I can tell you that we do use N-acetylcysteine mucomist actually also as an expectorant. So we use it as, you know, inhaled versions. Do they get a lot of it? Yes, they get a significant quantity. You obviously absorb a huge amount of it. Is it a great expectorant? No, it's a terrible expectorant. That's why I removed it from use in my hospital. We don't use it anymore. We use 9% sodium chloride. But we were using it at that point in time. Did it seem to make any difference in any of those individuals? No, it didn't seem to make any difference, but my sample size obviously is negligible. Will there be studies in that? You know, I can tell you the number of things that they have tried. It's very similar to this quote that my father likes about hiccups. You know, it can be considered in matters such as these, the number of things that we've tried is inversely proportional to the amount that we know. So everything that we can possibly come up with, you know, we've got, and Australia is like notorious for this. Colchicine, steroids, obviously that work. We had, oh crap, what is the helminthic ivermectin? They've tried to use ivermectin on it. They've tried probably 30 or 40 different things. There are numerous papers that all say, oh yeah, ivermectin works, you know, in vitro as an antiviral. So we're going to give these huge amounts of ivermectin to individuals. Colchicine, they used a lot of that because it's an anti-inflammatory with very different characteristics that we use primarily in gout. And so will somebody try it? I would be willing to bet they tried it because they are absolutely trying like every vitamin under the sun that they can possibly come up with, as well as a variety of herbal supplements. But I am not aware of anything that has been published that shows any.
Because I've been hunting to, and the reason why I said that is not even so much for in terms of it trying to be an expectorant, but it has the ability when it's taken on the respiratory side, that the way it works, it has the ability of opening up all the way down to the base of the lungs and allowing, like just can breathe better. So maybe you're not going to bring up all the crap and the cough up the junk and stuff like that in terms of being an expectorant, but somehow the way it works inside of the lungs, it just opens up the lungs and allows that breathing to happen, where a lot of times you come even off your inhaler and stuff, you don't have to use your inhaler as much and stuff like that. So it's that aspect of it I was curious about.
Right, and it doesn't, although I mean, some people may say that they like it, any expectorant will work, and 9% sodium chloride works significantly better. It doesn't open anything up. It helps to some extent to clear things out. It doesn't increase FEV1, doesn't increase any measured ability to change the respirations of asthmatic or COPD patients, but the patients do frequently feel better. They feel even much, much better when we use hypertonic saline, and we can really clear all of that out, make it more liquid, more smooth, your greater ability to clear all of those things once you've opened up the airways with other methods.
Right. That was a curiosity, what they were doing with it.
Yeah, but it's really just changing the fluid aspects of the mucus in your lungs. Any other questions?
I think for perspective here, the try the kitchen sink approach has had successes in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
When AIDS first came out.
Having to do that. Yeah.
What?
I said you always end up having to do that. I mean, unfortunately, yeah, targeted is like what we would like best. True science, where we have some sort of theory, you know, that it has some evidence behind it, we obviously like. But the shotgun approach absolutely is where essentially all science has come from.
Yeah, in the early days of the AIDS virus, the first things they tried were the kit of anything that had that looked like a nucleotide. Is
Yeah.
it's a virus. Let's try something that looked like a nucleotide. Some of them were anti-cancer drugs. Some of them had just been synthesized. And that's where AZT came from. The first AIDS drug to do anything whatsoever came from that. Try everything that it's already on the shelf that we have any remote idea might work. Try it first. But that wasn't the end all and the be all with AIDS, and that's rarely the end all and the be all with anything. But occasionally you get lucky. And
that's exactly what we did with Corona too.
COVID-19.
Yeah, every antiviral we could possibly come up with, somebody tried, which is why we had remdesivir, which was originally designed in order to treat Ebola. And then we had the 2 other interleukin-6 inhibitors that we tried, neither of which seemed to work. And we tried every antiviral that we have for hepatitis, HIV, the flu, everything else that we could possibly come up with. Yeah, we tried all of those as well.
And I think there would be a lot more emphasis on trying to get a cure if it didn't look like such a good case for vaccine.
Yeah.
You have to, if you're going to be spending trillions of dollars, you have to hedge your bets and look at what's the smartest thing to be putting money into. And if it looks like a vaccine is as possible as it has ever been with any virus in history, that's where you put your money.
Yeah, and it's the greatest success that we've had for everything except for hepatitis C.
Well, it's about 7:30 now, and it might be time to go because the panel's being recorded, and there's only so much room on the person's computer who's recording.
Excellent idea. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I was very happy to play devil's advocate.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank
Thank you.
I learned a lot.
Carol,
Thank you very
Carol,
much.
Thank you for having it.
Kendall, everybody who talked, everybody who asked a question.
Welcome. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. This has been a great, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'm leaving.
Hey, Nadia. I guess I'll go ahead and hang up now. Thanks, Tom. Thanks again for all your help when Ann had her thing, too. Oh, he's already done.